this evening. Okay, so yeah, so as Melissa said, Cloudy with a Chance of Mobile, talking about MAUI and running .NET everywhere with MAUI. So I'll do a bit of an introduction. I'll just let you guys know who I am. I'll talk about the history a bit as well of .NET and of cross-platform code and running code everywhere. We'll have a little bit of a look at the architecture of .NET 6, and I'll show you some demos as well. Some of these demos work, some of them don't. MAUI's still in preview, but the ones that don't work will at least demonstrate some of the concepts that I at least am excited about for MAUI. So as I said, start off with an introduction. I'll introduce myself. My name's Matt. I work at SSW. I do web and mobile development, so .NET, Blazor, Xamarin, and hopefully soon to be MAUI. If you do want to find me online, you can find me on Twitter at Matt Goldman. I have a blog at goforgoldman.com. And you can find me on GitHub there as well. I'm on GitHub as Matt-Goldman. So let's talk about MAUI then. What is MAUI? Is MAUI just this guy here from the movie Moana? No, not just that. MAUI is Microsoft's new cross-platform app development framework. It stands for Multi-Platform App UI. And what it is the evolution of Xamarin Forms. I don't know how many of you guys have done any mobile development, cross-platform development, or Xamarin Forms development. Certainly know, at least I recognize one name in the participants, so I know has dabbled with this a bit. So Xamarin has been around for a while. Xamarin Forms has been around for a while, and I'll talk a little bit more about what they are and how they work. And MAUI is the evolution of that. And MAUI is really, as we'll see in a moment when I talk about the history, is the culmination of a 20-year-old dream at Microsoft, really, to have a fully cross-platform framework that you can write code for and have it run anywhere, have it run, in the browser, on Mac, on Windows, on Linux, so on and so forth. And that's what MAUI is. So it's an evolution of Xamarin Forms, but it has been rebuilt from the ground up. So it's kind of, but a lot of the development patterns and concepts and the core, I guess, concept of Xamarin Forms is still there. But it's a new thing from Microsoft, and it's new in a lot of ways that we'll talk about as I go through. So I'm going to talk about the history. This for me was the favorite part of this talk, of putting together this talk. I really love this, but feedback I've had from developers is they're not that interested in it, so I'll go through it quickly. Personally, I could do a whole talk on this. I also learned while putting this together that I'd really love to make a documentary on the history of Sun Microsystems, but I'm just a huge nerd, so I'll just go through it as quick as I can. So story starts in 1996 with Java. Java was released by Sun Microsystems, and what Java is what they call WARA, write once, run anywhere. And the idea with Java is that before Java, you had to write software that you were coding against APIs provided by an operating system. So in Windows, there was the Win32 API. In Linux or Unix, it's the POSIX API, so on and so forth. But what Java was a runtime that you installed the runtime on that operating system, and you wrote your code in the Java language against the Java runtime. So your code was now operating system agnostic. Microsoft wanted that too. And they experimented a bit with their own implementations of Java a few times, but they came out with .NET Framework, and the first version of .NET Framework was released in 2002. .NET Framework only ran on Windows, but it was a runtime that you wrote your code against. So you wrote your code against the .NET API, the .NET Framework APIs, rather than writing your code against Windows. Shortly after this, Mono came out. Now, Mono is an open source implementation of .NET. It was written originally for Linux, and it was written by a couple of guys that were working at Novell at the time. They are now actually part of the Microsoft family. And I'll skip ahead a bit here from Mono to Xamarin. The first version of Xamarin came out in 2011. Now Xamarin is basically lets you write .NET code that runs on Android or iOS, and it uses the Mono runtime. So there's a couple of steps in between, which is Mono Touch, which was an implementation of Mono for iOS, and Mono Droid, which was an implementation of Mono for Android, so you could run .NET code on those platforms. Xamarin wrapped that up to let you write .NET code, but also have access to the platform native APIs. So Xamarin iOS is all of the iOS APIs that are available from the iOS operating system, but abstracted out to .NET. And the same thing with Xamarin Android. So Xamarin iOS gives you the iOS APIs and .NET. Xamarin Android gives you the Android APIs and Xamarin Android. This later became Xamarin Forms. Well, so those things are still there, but later on Xamarin Forms came out, and Xamarin Forms was a UI layer. So you could not only write iOS code or Android code, but you could actually write a shared UI and have that run on both of those targets. That was 2011. 2014, .NET Foundation was formed. .NET Foundation is effectively a not-for-profit organization that oversees .NET. Technically not part of Microsoft. Of course, Microsoft are a big player, but there's other corporations and individuals that are part of .NET Foundation. .NET Foundation oversees the open standard. .NET is a completely open standard, so they oversee that, and they also oversee the ecosystem. So there are potentially things that are part of the .NET Foundation without necessarily being part of .NET, but so certain projects that are well used and loved in the community. And the reason this is important is because it's part of Microsoft's journey towards open source. Everything that we're going to see tonight, MAUI, is open source. All of Mono, of course, is open source. But this is kind of what makes MAUI special. 2016 was a big step forward. So 2002 was the first version of .NET Framework. We had lots of versions of .NET Framework in between. Again, I'm glossing over, there was .NET Standard as well, which is what .NET Foundation are responsible for. But what makes .NET Core different to .NET Framework is that it's a fully portable runtime. So with the dream that you had with Java, you now have with .NET, because .NET Core isn't just for Windows. .NET Core runs on Mac OS, Linux, Windows. It runs in the cloud. Obviously, a lot of us are writing cloud apps with .NET Core. That was the first version of .NET Core in 2016, and that was a significant step forward in this journey. The other thing that happened in 2016 that was interesting was that Xamarin was acquired by Microsoft. So Xamarin at this point became a part of Microsoft, still not a part of .NET technically yet. It's something else that you can run with .NET, but not part of .NET. The next thing was 2018 was Blazor. Now Blazor isn't part of MAUI, it's not part of Xamarin, but why it's important is because it's a step in the journey of Microsoft letting you run .NET code anywhere. So Blazor, of course, runs in the browser. Microsoft had tried to get .NET code running in the browser before, so you could run WPF in the browser with Silverlight. This was a really awesome solution, no different to other things you had at the time, like Flash or Java, to let you run those proprietary code bases in the browser. But of course, we moved on from plugins, and people want to write single page applications that run using native browser code now. So that's what Blazor is now. That we've got WebAssembly, you can write .NET code and run it in your browser. Okay, then 2020, last year, a big step happened, and we went from .NET Core to just .NET, one .NET, when we had .NET 5 that came out last year. The reason this is such a big step is because this is really Microsoft's first real public push towards what they're calling one .NET, and we'll have a bit of a look of that in a minute. But now we've gone from having Xamarin Mono, .NET Standard, .NET Framework, .NET Core, Blazor. These are all now part of .NET. It's all just .NET. It's one .NET. And the final part of that dream will happen in this year, in November this year, when we get MAUI. So we'll have MAUI, and MAUI will be finally give us a cross-platform UI. So we've had cross-platform code up until now that we can run with .NET Core and .NET 5. But it's all command line code, right? So even your web servers that you write in .NET, it's just a command line application. But with MAUI, we'll have a UI as well. So I hope that wasn't too boring. I did rush through that, and I know that I've missed a few steps there. So if I've missed any of anyone's favorite bits of that history, I do apologize. So this is what I was talking about a moment ago when I said .NET 5. So .NET 5 last year, Microsoft started talking about one .NET. .NET 5 is one .NET. They were calling it at the time the road to one .NET. And you can see here that the idea is that you have your WPF, your Windows Form, your UWP apps for Windows, ASP.NET apps for web, Azure, mobile apps in Xamarin, gaming with Unity. Unity also runs on the Mono runtime, by the way. IoT, so we had Windows 10 IoT Core, which the future of Windows IoT is uncertain, to say the least. And of course, we have the AI and ML.NET stuff as well. A bit of a description of tooling on the right. So you can see we've got Visual Studio for Mac, Visual Studio Code, and the CLI, the .NET CLI. Those are still fragmented in .NET 5. You can do certain things with some of them that you can't do with others. So we're still not there yet in this one .NET journey. But you can see here that the point is that all of these things write for the .NET standard, and then you have .NET 5, which implements the .NET standard. So it's an open standard, .NET 5 implements it, and then the infrastructure layer underneath, you've got your runtime components and your compilers and your languages. So languages would be Visual Basic, C#, F#. Because it's open source, you can actually write your own .NET language if you want to, and some people do for fun. I heard Frank Kruger talking about that on a podcast recently. Crazy, but there you go. So the runtime components would be Mono, .NET Core, what have you, and then of course the compilers are, again, are open source. Microsoft give you a compiler to compile your .NET code. So that's .NET 5. That's where we're at now, and then we get MAUI in a couple of months. Now the difference between MAUI is that with if I just go back, which I can't do, with Xamarin. In fact, I'll talk a bit more about how it's, you know, the bottom-up versus top-down approach in shortly. But the concept with MAUI as a UI framework is that you write code from MAUI. So the way that this works here conceptually is step one is you write your MAUI code against the MAUI API. You're not writing an iOS app or a Windows app or a Mac app or an Android app. You have access to those platforms, which I'll talk about in a moment, but you're writing a MAUI app. So the next layer, so your code is your app code, and you write your code against the MAUI API, which is that layer underneath. MAUI, of course, wraps abstractions for .NET for Android, which used to be called Monodroid, and then Xamarin.Android. Same thing with .NET for iOS, which was previously Monotouch, and then Xamarin.iOS. Same thing for .NET for Mac, and the same thing with the WinUI API. So MAUI takes care of that for you. But you can write, if you're writing an app and you want to take advantage of specific features of the Android operating system, the APIs that gives you, this is what step 2 does here, is you can do that in your code. You can have access, direct access to those APIs. All of the platform native APIs that are there in Kotlin or Java for Android and Swift or Objective-C for iOS, same for Mac with Cocoa and everything for WinUI. All those APIs are directly there available for you in the same project in your solution. So if you want to write code against those, you can. That's what step 2 is. Step 3 there in this diagram conceptually is that where you've written your code in step 1 against the MAUI API, MAUI will then compile that down for you to, well, it will use those abstractions for you. So for example, if you are writing a UI widget, like let's say a button, in fact widgets is from Flutter, so let's not call them widgets, but let's say you're writing a UI button, and if you want to customize the button that comes with Android, you can do that. If you want to just say give me a button, .NET MAUI, when you target Android, will say, okay, I'm going to abstract this down to be an Android button. Same for iOS, Mac, so on and so forth. Underneath all that, you of course have the base class library. So you have the whole of the .NET base class library and the whole of the .NET ecosystem, as long as it's targeting .NET standard, which everything now should be. So you can't run .NET framework code, but you have access to the whole .NET ecosystem, base class library there, that you can also use in your code. And then in terms of where that runs in terms of infrastructure, on Android, iOS, and Mac OS, that will be the runtime that will run against for you is the Mono runtime. And on Windows, it will be the WinRT, Windows runtime. So you can see that there's a lot of infrastructure there, and you can see that there's a lot that goes into making it work. But the point is, you as a MAUI app developer, you can literally just live in that top layer there in your app code. And that's all you ever have to do. You can write an app, it will run in all these places for you. Microsoft have put in all the plumbing and the infrastructure to do that for you. So I mentioned that MAUI was the next evolution of Xamarin. So let's talk a little bit about what the differences are and why MAUI has evolved from Xamarin. So conceptually, Xamarin is bottom up. So I mentioned earlier that you've got Xamarin Forms. So you can write an app purely in Xamarin Forms and ignore iOS. You can ignore Android. They're still there, so you can't really ignore them, but you don't have to write Android code or iOS code. Even in .NET, you don't have, because that's what you do in Xamarin. You write your Android code in .NET. But you don't have to, but conceptually that's how it works. It's you start off with Android, and then you start off with Xamarin.Android on top of that, and then you put Xamarin Forms on top of that. You've also got Xamarin.iOS, and then you put Xamarin Forms on top of that, and then of course underneath that is the iOS APIs. So it's really bottom up. It's about taking, when Xamarin was first introduced, it wasn't meant as a cross-platform solution. It was meant if you're already an iOS developer and you're an Android developer, but you want to write an app for both, here we go. We'll give you a wrapper for those APIs that's in .NET, so you can still write all your Android code. You can still write all your iOS code to build your UI, but then for your shared logic, for your business logic, you can put that in a shared library that they can both consume. So it's really about sharing code between the two things. And then, we've put layers on top of that, so you can now write UIs as well. But it's conceptually, it's bottom up, and that's always been the approach with Xamarin. MAUI, it's top down, and it's basically like I described in the last slide, and it's the opposite of that. Underneath, from the infrastructure perspective, in terms of how the plumbing works, it still works the same way. You've still got the operating system APIs, you've still got mono runtime and whatever else on top of that, abstracting those out to .NET. But in terms of conceptually how you as a developer approach it, it's top down. You're not writing an Android app, you're not writing an iOS app, you're writing a MAUI app, and then you can target it at those platforms when you want to release it or build it for them. One of the big changes that's coming in MAUI is that in Xamarin, you have multiple projects. So in your solution, if you create a Xamarin Forms solution, you have your shared code where you can write your Xamarin Forms UI in XAML. Then you have your iOS project and you have your Android project. So if you want to write Android specific code, it goes in your Android project, and you can potentially write interfaces and abstractions so that you can have something that you reference in your shared code and have a platform specific implementation. But those solutions, those projects are in your solution. And then when you want to run for Android, you choose the Android project as your startup project and then run it. Same with iOS. With MAUI, it's a single project solution. So you can of course add other projects to it if you want to do things like if you want to reference other libraries or move some of your shared code out, what have you, but you don't have different projects for different platforms. You have your MAUI project. Inside that, there's ways of writing specific code for your specific platforms. If you want to, you can still do that. But essentially, you have your one MAUI project in your solution. So Xamarin again, is mobile focused. So it's a mobile first framework. You can write Mac apps with Xamarin. You can write Windows apps. Xamarin Forms, you've been able to write target Windows for a while, Mac as well. Xamarin Mac you can do, but really it's a mobile framework, and that's what it's for. You can just kind of do other stuff as well. The MAUI, it's everything's for first class citizen, mobile friendly, desktop friendly. You write your MAUI app and then you choose where to run it. With Xamarin, it's an additional product, so it's not part of .NET. It's an additional thing that you can install, kind of like Unity in a way, not as separated out from the rest of .NET as Unity is, but it's not part of .NET. It's something else that you do. Whereas with MAUI, it's part of .NET. It's just another workload, just like ASP, just like anything else that you want to write in .NET. It's just another workload. And that's really cool. I think making MAUI a first-class citizen at Microsoft is a big step forward, and it really shows how much Microsoft are backing this, which is cool. So one of the other differences is that Xamarin primarily is an MVVM design pattern framework. So I don't know how many of you have done Xamarin or before that have done WPF. The MVVM pattern was created for WPF. It stands for Model View Model. And it's just a little bit about how you organize your code. So your model is same as, you know, what you would call it anywhere else in .NET. It's a domain model essentially, and then you've got your view, which is your UI, and then you've got your view model, which is a model for your UI. So it's also similar to the way that you might do things in Angular if you're used to Angular. In MAUI, you can still do MVVM, but you also have the choice of MVU. So MVU is model view update. And this is the pattern that's familiar to people that are traditional iOS developers or are React developers. It's the model that you use there. Now you can, of course, do MVU in Xamarin as well through the use of community support. It is experimental in MAUI. If you see this little purple exclamation mark come up anywhere tonight, it's something that is experimental or not quite baked yet. As I mentioned, MAUI is still in preview. It hasn't been released yet, so there are some things that aren't quite there yet. MVU is through community support, using the same, in fact, community libraries that we have in Xamarin now. So you can do MVU in Xamarin through a library called Comet for C#, or Fabulous for F#. So these are the same libraries that are going to be used in MAUI, but they're being, you know, they're first-class citizens now, and they're being brought into the fold in the same way that community projects are brought into .NET in other scenarios as well. So one of the other cool things that we've had in Xamarin for a little while now is something called XAML hot reload. So XAML is the language, is the markup language that you use to write your UIs if you're not doing declarative markup. So XAML was created for WPF and is used in Xamarin as well. It's a different flavor of XAML, but this is how you define your UI. XAML hot reload means that while your app is running, you can make changes to your XAML, click save, and they'll be reflected live in your emulator or physical device without you having to restart your application. With MAUI, we'll have XAML and .NET hot reload. The difference here is that not only can you change code for your UI while it's running, but you can actually change code for your .NET code as well. So you can, you know, change it, apply that code while it's running without having to restart your application. What's interesting about that is that that's not a feature of MAUI at all. That's actually a feature of .NET 6. So you'll get that in ASP, you'll get it in Blazor, you get it for free in MAUI as well. So that's going to be a real improvement to the developer experience with MAUI over Xamarin. Excuse me. So one of the other differences is the tooling. So with Xamarin, the tooling is basically Visual Studio and Visual Studio for Mac. So Visual Studio for Mac isn't really Visual Studio. It's the evolution of what started out as Mono Develop and then became Xamarin Studio and then became Visual Studio for Mac. But it's evolved a lot and it's got a lot closer, and we almost have feature parity between the two now. But in terms of first-party tooling, this is what you need to create Xamarin apps. You can do some third-party stuff as well, like with Rider, but for first-party support, this is the tooling. With MAUI, you still have those things, but you also have the .NET CLI and you have support in VS Code. So the VS Code support is experimental. It's still not there yet, but the .NET CLI stuff is cool. So you can do .NET New MAUI. You can't do .NET New Xamarin. You've never been able to. You've never had any CLI support for Xamarin. So having the .NET CLI support for MAUI is really cool. So I want to look at how you structure your projects a little bit differently now as well. So on the left, we've got the old way, which is a blank Xamarin Forms app. On the right is a blank MAUI app. So the first thing that you might notice is we've got our Xamarin Forms project in our solution here. But we also have an Android project in our solution, and we also have an iOS project in our solution. So I mentioned earlier that these are 3 different projects. MAUI, we have, and in fact, just to talk back to these, if you want to write your Android specific code, it goes in your Android project, and your iOS specific code goes in your iOS project. With MAUI, 1 project with a caveat, which you've probably spotted, but I'll talk about that in a moment. 1 project in MAUI, and that's it. And your iOS and Android specific code go in folders within that project in the same solution. You may have noticed there is a WinUI project there as well. That's because at the moment, MAUI apps in preview do have a separate project for WinUI. It's using Project Reunion to run your MAUI app on WinUI on Windows. But when this comes out in November, that will be gone. So don't worry too much about that. It will just be the one project. One other thing that I want to point out, as you may have seen highlighted on the left here, just above where the iOS is highlighted, within the Android app, we've got a main-activity.cs file. So main-activity.cs is where your main method lives on Android. So when you bootstrap an Android application, the main activity, the Android main activity is what is launched. For iOS, it's app delegate. So within our app delegate, within our iOS project, we've got an app delegate. Within our Android project, we've got a main activity. And when the iOS operating system launches our iOS app, it will look for the app delegate. When our Android operating system launches our Android app, it will look for the main activity. So these are the entry points for those operating systems into our app. And what they do is they bootstrap the app.xaml. In fact, the code behind it. So the main activity bootstraps our app.xaml. The app delegate bootstraps our app.xaml. And that's where our Xamarin Forms code starts. In our shared single MAUI project, we've got a startup.cs. So this is much more .NET familiar. So in the same way that we have startup in .NET Core, we have this in our MAUI project as well. And it's the startup.cs that then bootstraps our app.xaml. So those are the main differences between between the two platforms and how we structure our code. So that's enough talking about it. I want to show you a quick demo. And what I'm going to show you is MAUI chat. So this is a very, very simple chat app that I've put together. Simple demo, but fortunately this one works, or it did when I checked it an hour ago. Feel free to jump in and join in with this demo. You can go to that website there, mauichat.azurewebsites.net. You can scan that QR code if you want to scan the code to take you to that website. Let's jump across and see what that looks like. So this is mauichat.azurewebsites.net. This is a Blazor application. So I can add a name here as a user. And I will say, hi, Randy, hi, because they've already jumped in. Sticking with that MAUI theme. Yeah, we've got MAUI here from from Moana. And what this does is it assigns you a random avatar based on one of the characters from MAUI. So if I send other messages, I'll still get that same one. So yeah, so that's nice. That's Blazor, and that's the Blazor app. But I also have this running here in Windows. This is a Windows desktop app that's also running that same code. And you can see I've got it here running on Android as well. I could also have it running on iOS if I wanted to, or Mac OS if I wanted to. I'll add Mac2 here, hello.mel.net. And we can see that comes up. That comes up here. So yeah, thanks, Tim. That's wisdom for you. So yeah, so we've got this code here, and we've got an app that doesn't quite look as cool on Android. We'll see if we can do something about that. But let's have a look and see what this looks like, and I'll just walk you guys through this. So this is my MAUI chat application. This is a Blazor application, and what I've done here is I've taken just a Blazor hosted Blazor solution. So I've got my Blazor application here in my client. I have here the server, and in my server is basically a Signal R hub. Let me just zoom that in for you guys a bit more, maybe a bit more. So it's just a Signal R hub, and what's happening is, you're sending messages from the Blazor client. I'll show you the page here. We just saw this. This is the page that we were just using. And I think down here in the code behind, we can see that, I'm sending, when you click send, I'm using that hub connection to send a message. And I'm listening for incoming messages there as well. I'm not going to talk too much about that anymore. But what's really cool is that in my solution down here, I've got a shared project. And in here, I've got chat message. So this is a simple solution, and really it's just for illustration. In a real world situation, you might have more complex shared code, but this shared project is a dependency here in the client, the Blazor client, and in the server. So that's there as well. So that's the back end, so the Blazor client and the server. Now you'll see here that in my MAUI app, I've added that shared code here. So I'm sharing this same type here from this, I've added the dependency here. So in my MAUI app, let me just close this down a bit. So you can see I've got that dependency. These are defined per target. So I've got .NET 6 Android, iOS, and Mac Catalyst. But in all of them, I've got that shared code there. So I've already started sharing code between my Blazor UI, my MAUI app, and my backend. You can see here that I've got my iOS folder, which is where my app delegate lives. I've got my Android folder, which is where my main activity lives. I don't have to do anything with those if I don't want to. I've got my pages here. So this is a chat page. This is written in XAML. I'll just zoom this one in as well. This XAML is basically almost identical to Xamarin Forms XAML. So anyone that's done any Xamarin stuff would recognize this. It's even still got this in here because it's an old template. As I said, it's still in preview. The difference between this and Xamarin Forms is the namespaces. So in fact, why don't I show you my main page, because that's where my real code is. So here, you can see that I've got my namespaces here updated for MAUI. Other than that, this is more or less the same as just a Xamarin Forms, a Xamarin Forms app. So I'm not going to talk too much about XAML and how XAML works, but you can see that I've written this code here in XAML. It's running here on Android. I've got it running on Windows as well. And there's as I said, imported the share code, and that's a dependency here as well. So in fact, if I show you my service, have I got service? Have I just done it straight in here? Oh, I've done it in my view model. So this is how the model view model pattern works. In here, I've got a hub connection. So I've got a dependency on SignalR in this project. And I have got somewhere a lot of messy code here because the reason this doesn't look so great is because it's in preview, and a lot of the features that I might like to use in MAUI, that if this was a Xamarin Forms app, are not ready yet. So let's not worry too much about that. But you can see that I've got a hub connection from SignalR. I've got this chat message here that I'm using. Yeah, it's preview. Don't worry about it. But it's this one. It's from that shared code. So that's all good. But as I said, this looks cool. This looks really nice. I'm happy with this. This looks crap. But you might have noticed that when I showed you the Windows version looks more or less the same as the Blazor version. And that's because one of the other options you have, we spoke about declarative code with C# using something like Comet or Fabulous for F#. We spoke about XAML doing MVVM, but with MAUI, you can also write your UI in Blazor. So I have a separate version of the app here called MAUI Chat Blazor. Now, what this is you might look at this and you might say this is a mashup of MAUI and Blazor. I can't zoom in the Solution Explorer, I'm afraid, but what we've got here is we've got a startup.cs that bootstraps our app. We're still using a use MAUI app, right? But all of our UI is written here using Razor. So this is the same identical Razor code here in my UI, in my MAUI Blazor UI, as I'm using in my client front end here. It's literally, it's the same code. It's identical. It's the same code. And I'll zoom this one in a bit as well. So that's really cool, right? I can actually build a MAUI native binary executable application that will run on Windows, Mac, Linux, not Linux yet, sorry, I'll come back to that. Mac, Windows, Android, iOS, and I can write it in Blazor and still have access to all the platform native APIs. I can do encryption, which you can't do in the browser at the moment. That's something that obviously is coming soon. But I have access to contacts, SMS, phone, some of the device stuff you get access to through your browser. You can do location. It's not the same. But you have access to all that just using this Blazor app here. And one thing that you might notice is that I've still got my shared code library that I've imported here, but I've also got this Razor class library that I've added. So if I go back to my backend here with my Blazor app, in fact, I'll just take you back to the demo here. What you're seeing here is a Blazor page that I've written. Up here, we've got a couple of inputs and a button and some images and a heading. But this down here what you're seeing here, this is an imported Razor view from my Razor class library, and I'm sharing that Razor class library down here with my, so you can see here, I got my message list.razor. This is the same message list. This is now the MAUI app that we're looking at, and I'm using that message list here in my Blazor code, in my MAUI app, using the same shared code Razor class library that I'm using here in my Blazor app in the front end. I think that's really cool. Reusable code for .NET that you can use in your platform UIs, using, you know, just your .NET code that you share. Full .NET ecosystem. I can pull in any NuGet package I want, but I can also write my UI in Blazor, and I can reshare UI components in a Razor class library, you know, and share them with a Blazor UI that I also write in MAUI and just run everywhere. I think that's really cool. I'm nerding out a bit, but I really love that you can do this now. So yeah, so yeah, that is, in my view, very cool. So we saw there a little bit of a demo, and I've got a video here because everything's in preview. So, you know, sometimes things work and sometimes they don't. But I'll just let this run quickly now, and we'll skip through it because we've seen the live demo. Cool. So I'll talk through a little bit about what we've seen and why I think it's cool. So what we have is an Azure app service that runs a SignalR hub, and that talks to a Blazor web app using SignalR and using shared code, using a message type library. Again, it's simplified for a demo. You might have a more complex scenario. And we've also got a MAUI app that's, you know, a native binary executable that runs on Mac, Android, iOS, Windows, also talking to that SignalR hub using that same shared .NET library. And all three of them, you know, using that shared code. And in one case where we saw the MAUI Blazor, we're sharing UI between a web UI and a native app as well. So I think that's really cool. I think that, you know, the fact that you can write a full stack cloud application in .NET, where you write your UI.NET, your web UI.NET, your backend, your cloud, your mobile app, desktop, everything in .NET. And I just think that's really cool. So that was a simple demo. I want to show you another demo now. This one is a more complex demo, and it's a little bit more interesting, but it doesn't fully work. So I do apologize for that. Bear with me if you can. This is called DevHops, and DevHops is a project that we've been talking about at work at SSW for a couple of years now, where we're going to use code to brew better beer. So I'm using Microsoft's fast design system here, which also is evolving. And, you know, this didn't look like this when I built it, and I haven't updated it. But the idea here is that I can have this application and this, you know, this web app, and what I can do is I can add recipes. So I can search and add recipes for my different brews, my different beer brews. And I brew my own beer at home, by the way. So this is why I'm keen to experiment with this. Then I can add a batch, and I can say, well, here's a recipe that I've brewed, and I can add it and I can keg it. I can look at my different kegs, see where they are, you know, different locations for, not for me, I've just got the one bar here, but, you know, in the different offices, we might have different kegs. But, you know, I might start by, you know, I want to add a new beer recipe, and I might call it mel.net IPA. And I'll choose the style, and I'll say that this is going to be an IPA. And this, of course, has crashed now. So I'm using the free tier, and it goes to sleep a bit. But, you know, let's not worry about that too much. But I'll talk you through what this is. And that's the MAUI app. Let's have a look at GitHub. I'll talk you through the code on GitHub. So this is on GitHub. If you want to have a look at the code and play with it, you're welcome to. When I built this, it was one of the earlier previews of MAUI, and I haven't updated it. I did start updating it, but the new versions were coming out quicker than I could update it. So I figured I'll leave as it is until it comes out of preview and just do smaller test projects with the previews for now. So let's have a look and see what we've got. So what we have here is it's actually, I started off with a hosted Blazor solution, and then I just started abstracting out some of the layers. So this has now been rebuilt according to Jason Taylor's clean architecture, not using his template. I just used the Blazor hosted template and then refactored it to add the other layers. What he calls, and here's the web API, is the web UI I've called web API, because in my case, the Blazor UI is separate. But in here, we've got our startup.cs, and I'm not going to talk too much through the backend solution. But, you know, I've got the application layer and the domain layer and the infrastructure layer. But what I do have is this client project. And what this is an auto-generated C# client generated by NSWAG. So again, in Jason's clean architecture template, and I don't know how many of you know that, but you would have within your web UI project, you would have a Angular UI, and you'd have a TypeScript generated client. In my case, I'm using a Blazor UI. So in my Blazor project, I have a dependency on that client project, which is where the auto-generated client code goes. And then I have my Blazor UI. And that's great. I can share that code with the Blazor UI. That's awesome, right? Then I have a MAUI app. And this is, in fact, let me just bring this across. I'll just show you guys this. That's not the right screen. So you can see that I have the MAUI app here, the same MAUI code. I don't know why that keeps switching screens like that. I do apologize. So you can see I've got the MAUI app, so I've got the Blazor app running in .NET. I've got the backend running in Azure in .NET, and I've got the MAUI UI app running in .NET as well in MAUI. Here this isn't MAUI Blazor, this is MAUI XAML. I've got it running here on Android. I've got it running here on Windows. It will also run on iOS. It will also run on Mac. So let's have a little bit of a look at that. So this is the MAUI app. Again, it's two projects, but it will be one when it's not in preview. Now this isn't a different solution. So I also wanted to get access to that shared code. So what I did was in here, you can see that I have got I've actually got a GitHub workflow that takes that client project, that's the auto-generated client, and this actually publishes it to a private NuGet feed in this repo. So that means that without, which you can see here, so that means without the MAUI app being part of the same solution, I can still use that shared code. Again, in the real world, for a solution like this, you might not do that, but you might have different teams working on the different parts of your solution, and you might want to share that code with them. You can publish it to NuGet, you can publish it to a private NuGet feed, Azure DevOps, GitHub, whatever. So I've got that dependency in here, but that dependency is coming in via NuGet. So in here, I want to talk a bit more about how MAUI differs from Xamarin. So in MAUI, we now have this startup. I'll zoom this in for you a bit as well. Now, this is not 100% familiar to ASP.NET developers, but this is a lot more like it than what you get with MAUI, with Xamarin, sorry. So you can see here that I've got this app builder, and I've got use MAUI app, which then bootstraps this app, which is this class here, this app class here. This is the entry point to our application. And then I've got my configure services method here. So this is using the built-in .NET dependency injection container, IOC container that comes with MAUI, the same one that you get with .NET 5, .NET Core. It's now available in mobile apps and in desktop apps and in native binary executables like MAUI. Previously with Xamarin, you had to use a third-party IOC container. Some of there are MVVM frameworks that wire it up automatically for you. Otherwise, you would have to import something like AutoFac or your IOC container of choice. But now in MAUI, you just use the built-in one. So that's really cool. You can see here that I'm adding some services here. And I'm doing this in the same way that I might do for an ASP project. So I'm registering my services, registering my view models. So my view models represent the model of the page, the view, and then I'm registering my services. So I've got services here that abstract out some of the functionality in that client that I've pulled in. So that's great for the familiarity. Something that I'm not going to talk about this evening is Shell. So Shell was introduced in Xamarin Forms 4, and it's a way of writing your apps and structuring the layout of your app. And by layout, I mean the different pages, not the visual layout, and the different areas of your app. So if you're using Shell, you can use URL navigation within your app. You can navigate to a page, and if you use Shell to navigate to a page, it will register those. It will resolve those dependencies for you. But with anything other than Shell, you can't. So I am using here this little use page resolver. This is my own plugin. I actually got a bit of help from William on this. So you can see I've got a dependency on that there as well, and that's available on NuGet. So if you want to use this, you can. It's all in preview, so it might break. I'll try and keep it up to date. I'm hoping that when MAUI comes out of preview, you won't need it, because they'll build something in that does it, so you don't have to use shell. But I'll just show you how it works. So if I open up one of my view models here, what this means is that if I want to have a new page and I want to navigate to a new page, I can just use navigation push async. This is an extension method that comes from my package, add batch page. So this will now navigate to my batch page. Previously, without that, you would have to go await. Wait, I can type, honestly. Navigation dot push async new add batch page. You would have to do that. And if add batch page had any dependencies, which it does, like an add batch view model, which also has a dependency on this batch service, you would have to manually new those up. Whereas now with this plugin that I've got, you can just use this extension method. So that's really neat as well. So if you're interested, feel free to play with that and feel free to contribute to it as well. It's pretty lightweight. There's more lines in the README than there are lines of code. So, and I'll come back to talk about why that's important a bit later on. But yeah, that's the MAUI app. So as I said, I can't really show you much more because it's not fully working at the moment. I've got the full solution open here as well. But yeah, again, something that I think is really cool is that I've got .NET code here running an API in the back end, and it's also, sorry, that's why I've got these open. So I've got my API running .NET code. I've got a client library that's automatically generated, that's generated by this back end, that is then consumed in my Blazor app here, and then I've also got that same library sharing that same code with my MAUI app. So got .NET code, it runs everywhere, and I think that's really cool. There's I mentioned the plugin, the page resolver, that's on GitHub. As I said, this README here is longer than the amount. There's more. I wrote more lines here than I did code and thing. So that's really cool. So it's pretty lightweight, I think, anyway. So as I said, we've got the Blazor UI, we've got the backend running in Azure, we've got an app here running on Android, we've got an app here running on Windows. But what's really interesting about this is that I can actually write different versions of this app for different platforms. So I could have it on Windows do one thing, and I could have it on Android do something else. And why this is interesting is the concept behind this. So for me, when I might want to come in here and I might want to add a recipe to my database here, but then when I'm out in the brew shed, I don't have access to my desktop. I just want a way of logging my brews on my phone. And then at the bar next to my kegs, I might want something that displays my kegs and what's on tap and lets people rate it and that sort of thing. In Xamarin, you had a way of targeting different platforms, and you would do that by using on idiom, and you would do that in your UI. You could use on idiom, you could use on platform. So you could say, if you're rendering on a phone, look like this. If you're rendering on iOS, look like this. But with MAUI, you can actually use compiler directives. So you can say this code only goes into Windows. This code doesn't even go into anything else. And a real world use for that for me is there's a real world app that I work on that's a mobile app, and it's got a React web UI, and then it's got Electron for desktop. It'd be great if we could unify all that, have one code base. But there are some features that should only work on desktop that should never work on mobile. Using the kind of on platform thing, someone could reverse engineer it, they could DISM it, and they get access to that code. But using compiler directives, that code that enables that functionality isn't even on the device. Now, if you want to see how that works, there's a really cool repo here called Weather21, and this is by David Ortonell from Microsoft. He's the principal program manager for MAUI, and this app here is a sample app for MAUI here. So you can have a look at this. He does keep it up to date. Really good way of showing off the capabilities of MAUI. Read through it, see what he's done. That's really awesome. But where I think this is really cool, if I just jump into his startup here, so go into his shared code and we'll look at his startup, you can see here that he's using compiler directives. So Different use case to what I was talking about, but what he's got is he's got a service called he's got an abstraction that he's defined called iTray service. Okay, and on Windows, and that's so it can run in the tray, right? On Windows, that is using abstracting out the WinUI.tray service. He's also got an iNotification service that he's defined an abstraction for. And again, on Windows, that's the iNotification, the WinUI notification service. But if you want to run this on Mac, it's using the Mac Catalyst tray service and the Mac Catalyst notification service. And you might notice that there's an if Windows, else if Mac Catalyst, and that's it. So if you're running on Android or iOS, you don't have these services at all. So this is a really cool way of enabling capability per platform, per device. But I did say .NET everywhere, and there's one use case we haven't covered yet in our cloudy mobile DevOps solution. So far we've got where I can run my .NET code where I'm creating or adding a recipe, where I can run my .NET code where I'm brewing it, where I can run my .NET code where I'm serving it. But there's more to this story. And what's more to this story is this. This is one of Microsoft's IoT core samples, and this is a flow volume sensor. So it runs on a Raspberry Pi, and in fact, I actually have one right here. So this is my Raspberry Pi. This is my flow volume sensor, and this will run Windows IoT Core. And this will detect, whenever I pour a beer, it will detect the flow through that, update my database. In real time, I'll see on my tablet next to the bar how much is left in each keg. I think that's really cool as well. So this is Windows IoT Core, which is, as I said, the future's uncertain. But that's not that important, because the library that this uses, that this depends on, is system.gpio. So GPIO is general purpose input output, which is these pins here that you see on the Raspberry Pi. And there's actually there's a .NET namespace that lets you interact with that, and that is available in .NET 6. So at the moment, it's a Windows 10 IoT Core app. It will probably become just a .NET 6 command line app. I don't need a UI for it, so I don't need IoT Core. So that's the way that that's going. So that, as I said, it's not the most slick demo, but I think that it shows a lot of what you can do with MAUI and a lot of what you can do with .NET across your full stack. So that's what we saw. And architecturally, the way it works is we've got our API and our Blazor code, which is written in .NET. It's all .NET 6. And that is published, that is pushed to GitHub, and GitHub will then run GitHub actions. And what those GitHub actions do is it deploys the Azure App Service and it deploys the Blazor UI. So I've got my .NET code, it's in GitHub, it deploys it off to Azure. But there's another GitHub action that takes the shared client code package, which is consumed in that Blazor UI, and that publishes it to a private NuGet feed in my repo. My MAUI app consumes that, and then using that shared code, I can then run on iOS, Android, macOS, and Windows. So I have a full stack solution running cloud, desktop, running everywhere, just .NET running everywhere with MAUI. And I think that's really exciting. I think it's an exciting time to be a .NET developer. You can write, you can write a server, you can write a cloud, you can write a desktop app, you can write a mobile app, you can write a web app, and you can just do it all share this code between all of them. For me, that's the dream, and that's why I'm super excited about MAUI. So a little bit of a summary. That's it for the demos. That's it for the code. It's a very, very high level introduction. So everything's on GitHub. If you want to have a look a bit more at the code or ask me any questions, feel free to reach out. Feel free to look at GitHub and poke around the repos. But a summary of what we looked at. We did a bit of an introduction to me. We talked about the history of .NET, the shared code dream, the run anywhere dream, and how we're getting close to that. We looked a little bit at .NET 6, the architecture of a MAUI app. I showed you a couple of demos, and what we saw resulting from that is how you can have .NET code that is just portable, flexible, suitable for any use case, suitable for any environment. You run .NET code anywhere. And that, for me, as I said, is the dream, and it's the 20-year-old dream from Microsoft. And as I said, super exciting time. That is very much it from me. So thank you very much. Thank you all for watching my talk. That was great fun for me, and I hope it was fun for you as well.